The Scottish Highland was a hiding place, but the past always finds a way to catch up, and when it does, it brings all the reckoning you thought was lost. Chapter 1. Law Does Not Define You. A witch in the territory of the RainbowHeart is unheard of, let alone one that stays in their midst. For the past 10 years, the compound has been operating under the radar. They project themselves as a healing center and provide support for all women in need. But their exclusivity has raised questions, but everyone is afraid to approach and confront. The disappearance of abused women from the community and surrounding towns has been increasing, and whispers has been growing louder, but still, no one interferes. The head of RainbowHeart is a fierce auburn-haired woman in her early 40s with a stern face, tight jawline, and emerald eyes that look straight through you. Approach at own peril. She is always dressed in bright colors. Yellow sundress, tan sandals or flowery skirt, and off-shoulder white, flowy white top. She radiates sunshine and brightness and is a stark contrast to her facial expressions. But every woman in the camp swears that she has a heart of gold and is always ready to help. So, who is she? How is she the head of a cult, or rather haven, like they call it? To understand her, we need to go back to the beginning. So, buckle up and don't blink, otherwise you will miss the important parts. Etheria Anthin was an ordinary young law student. She ran through her degree like it was child's play. She became one of the most influential lawyers in the country. She rose to every occasion, won every case, was selective in her clients, and built a name for herself that deserved all the recognition that came with it. Her law firm was worth millions of dollars, and she had a client waiting list for months. Then one day she just disappeared, and no one knew where she was. She sold her shares, emptied all her accounts, sold the penthouse, and vanished, like she never existed. Stories spread throughout the Manhattan circles. From her psychological state to her embezzlement of funds, to even kidnapping. The stories got worse as they spread, but no one knew what the reason was. That one day Etheria was in court, slamming the defense, and the next she was gone. So, what happened, and are there answers to the questions? The late afternoon sun paints the highlands of the small town in Scotland orange. The sounds of people settling for the evening, and the fire in the middle of the camp crackles with every log thrown onto it. Slowly women started walking towards the center, where the fire has now reached a level of heat and welcome. They settle around on the stones and branches that was arranged as seating. Someone is playing the guitar and joined by a bagpipe. It's a slow and melodic tune that welcomes all and brings everyone close. The soft hum of the women merges with the sounds from the instruments, and it creates an intimate bond. Every woman here is willing and completely voluntarily here. This is home for them, and they are fiercely protective of their homes. Then the music stops and Etheria spoke. The words are in Gaelic, and her American accent is vaguely noticeable. Fealty of Hale. We are home, we are here, we are 1 inch. The woman echoes home, and then they pass a goblet around. Each woman takes a sip and passes to the next. When it reaches Etheria, she takes the goblet in both hands and let the cool liquid pass over her lips. She swallows and then closes her eyes for a second and murmurs softly. Home. The conversation around the fire continues, with each one sharing their day and giving encouragement to each other. They share embraces, and then the group disperses as each woman retrieves to her home. Etheria purchased the land and built 30 small 1-bedroom houses on it. Then at the far corner of the property, her own 2-bedroom house and a barn that extends to the edges of the south boundary line. This is where all the activities of the community happen. There are animals to be fed, gardens to be tended to, needlework classes, and at the end of the barn, self-defense classes. The figures of a lanky woman, looks to be in her 30s, steps up to Etheria, and they walk in silence for a while before she speaks. Matt Hare, there are no news on the break-ins. We have, however, been following a small group of vagrants that has been loitering, but nothing serious. We will find the responsible one for the break-ins, even though nothing has been stolen since the first one occurred. Might just be vandalism. Etheria stops and looks at her. Elise, you are amazing at keeping everything under control. Let's keep an eye on it, but I also think it might just be the kids in the area. I will be traveling to the city next week and see if I can speak to the police and see if they can maybe send a patrol. Ailey nods and walks off to her house. Etheria watches her go and then walks to the edge of the property where the break-in occurred. Nothing seems out of place, except for the fence that was slightly lifted. It seems too small for an adult, so it must be a teenager. She vows to keep an eye on it because the safety of everyone on this property is her responsibility. Chapter 2. The Deliberate Encounter. In the days that followed, life on the plot continued without any hiccups. Etheria leaves for the city and leaves Ailey in charge. She takes with her the cook to help her stock up the pantry as they are now approaching the winter season. And rains on the Highlands can cause them to be stranded for days, even weeks, before they can travel again. Etheria steps into the grocer, and the slightly dim interior has her squinting her eyes to get used to it after the brightness outside. Both women fall into an easy rhythm of selecting the best goods, tin foods, bags of flour, and small treats for each woman. Etheria is lost in thought, strolling through the aisle when she walks into someone. The collusion has them both stumbling back, and Etheria steadies herself before she looks at the woman. Raven black hair falls over her shoulder. She is dressed in black, low-hanging slacks, a turtleneck soft cashmere jersey, and a long black leather coat and black boots. Etheria's gaze travels up and down her body and back to her face. Her lips are slightly parted, faint pink lipstick on her lips, and her cheeks are slightly crimson. But it's her eyes that keeps Etheria captive. They look more like pools of a deep lake, gray-blue with a hint of silver. Eyes a person can get lost in. She opens her mouth to speak, but no sound is audible. Then a voice like a gentle breeze fills her ears. Her eyes drop to the woman's mouth, more to make sure the sound of coming from her. I am sorry, I was not looking where I was going. Are you okay? Etheria nods, unsure if she can trust her voice. The smile on the woman's face is radiant. I am Melisandre, and I sincerely apologize if I startled you. Etheria looks down at the outstretched hand, and her own hand raises automatically. The touch is electric, and she nearly pulls away too quick. Etheria. They stood in silence for a beat, until the cook from her community breaks the spell. I am done. Etheria nods and turns to look at her, and then back to Melisandre, but she already turned and walked away. She steers the cook in the directions of the cashier to pay, and then they leave the store. Her mind stuck at the moment she looked into those storm-gray eyes. The drive back to the compound is long and silent. The occasional question of the cook and short answers she gives is the only sound disturbing the silence in the truck. They reach the compound, and Etheria parks the truck close to the barn, where they store all their supplies. She hands the keys to Ailey, already waiting for them, and then walks slowly to her house. This is the first time in 10 years that a stranger has made such an impact on her. She always keeps the outside world out, too afraid of exposure to her carefully crafted world. The cult prides itself on privacy, and she makes sure that their safety is her priority. She has rescued many women from abusive relationships, drugs, and prostitution over the years, but her past remains a secret to all, and she prefers it that way. But something about Melisandre pricked at the back of her neck, and it's a feeling that her brilliant law mind never just ignore. She settles onto the chair in front of the fireplace and stares into the flames. Her eyes close, and she recalls the encounter. A knock on her door drags her back to reality, and she gets up. Her boots creaks on the wooden floor, a loud noise against the silent room. Ailey stood there and hands her a folder. The report for today. Seems it was just a teenager with some friends that was exploring. So, no serious concern for the break-ins. She nods, and Ailey leaves her standing in the middle of the room, still dazed with Melisandre. On the other side of town, Melisandre sits in her small apartment. The room is filled with crystals and books, and there is a small altar at the back of the lounge. She is a witch, but not just any witch. She is a Wiccan goddess, reincarnated with the powers of her shaman history. She has lived many lives and seen many generations. She is the only one of her kind left. There are other witches, different religions and creeds, but only one gets chosen every 100 years as a vessel for reincarnation. They are also feared by most and hunted. The other covens believed if they kill them before they fulfill their life mission, then no other reincarnation would happen. It has not been proven, but they all have been very careful in their walk of life. She gets up to stand in the pentagram on her floor, and, with a flick of her hand, the candle at each corner lights up. She closes her eyes and slowly starts chanting. An ancient chant that the language has been lost to the modern world. Then she reaches into her pocket and takes out a single strand of hair. Etheria's. She pulled it from her head as she turned in the aisle earlier today. She lets it float in front of her and continues to chant. Then the strand floats and stops midair before it drops. In that moment, Melisandre knew she found what she was looking for. She descends slowly from her levitating position and stands in the middle of the pentagram. The candles flicker out and the pentagram disappears into the wood. Melisandre packs her backpack and, with a determination in her step, walks out her apartment. She gets onto her Ducati and drives to the edge of town towards the Highlands. Her mind running through scenarios of why she would need the protection of the RainbowHeart compound and, more specifically, the leader, Etheria. As the wheel spurs on the tarred road, the distance seems to disappear under the roar of the powerful engine. It's late afternoon and the sun are setting over the Highlands, painting the horizon crimson and orange in equal measure when she reaches the gate of the RainbowHeart compound. She scans the surroundings and, driving slowly up to the gate, noticing the two women opposite of the gate, dressed in what seems like old camouflage uniforms. She stops in front of them, takes the helmet off and let her raven hair fall down her back. She steps off the motorcycle and slowly approaches. The two women look at her suspicious and the taller one speaks into the radio. Etheria is in her office when the radio on her desk crackles with the voice of her guard at the gate. She walks to the room behind her and the screens lit up with the various camera feeds on the property. Her eyes, however, are focused on the feed from the gate. Then her heart does something she has not felt in a very, very long time. Increased beating and her throat dry up instantly. The woman from the grocery store. Her eyes are focused on the camera above the gate, and it's like she is looking directly at Etheria. The silence is palpable, and it feels like hours, but it's only a minute. Etheria speaks into the radio. What is the purpose of her visit? She watches as her guard relays the message, sees Melisandre's mouth move when she answers. She presses the button on the keyboard to zoom in. She is lost in the beauty of this woman at the gate, and every instinct screams danger, but she knows. Her treacherous heart is ruling her steadfast mind at this moment. The radio crackles again with a response from the guard. She says that she is broken and dissolute and here that no questions are asked. Etheria cringes at the words. Those were the words she would give to women in need and nowhere to go. That is almost a guarantee that she will let them in. She speaks into the radio, and the gate goes open. Melisandre slides her hand through her helmet and gets back onto the bike. She drives to the front of the barn slowly. The late evening has most of the women already preparing for dinner. She stops in front of the barn and waits. Etheria watches her from her house and then inhales deeply before she steps out onto the clear, crisp air. She approaches the motorcycle with suspicion, and it is only when she stands next to Melisandre that she speaks. Melisandre, if I remembers correctly. Yes, and you are Etheria. Etheria does not stretch her hand out for a greeting, just folds her arms in front of her chest and then says, Ailey's will show you to a place to sleep. Then she turns around and walks away. Her legs unsteady and her heart, that traitorous organ, beating like it is running a marathon. Melisandre slowly starts to fit into the community. The women are warm and no one is suspicious of her arrival. They all have been here, needing a place to stay and food on the table. She gets allocated a small room on the property and slowly she starts making it her own. She is very careful not to display any crystals, and her grimoire remains hidden under a cloak of spells. Only she can see it on the small table where she puts her personal belongings. Her small room is protected with wards and invisible ruins. She needs to know when someone approaches her door and gives her enough time to hide everything under a magical cloak of invisibility. So why is she really here? For that answer, we need to go back 11 years. The time when Etheria was still a very successful and powerful lawyer. Chapter 3. Whispers Beneath the Verdict. 11 years ago, Manhattan. The courthouse echoed with the click of heels and the quiet murmur of careers being made and unmade. Etheria Anthen didn't walk through it, she ruled it. Sharp jaw, raven black suit tailored like armor, and a gaze that cut cleaner than any cross-examination. Every soul in the room held their breath when she spoke. The case was explosive. The People vs. Ascendance Foundation. A class action lawsuit against the Ascendance Foundation, a powerful spiritual wellness organization with global reach and very private funding. On the surface, they offered spiritual healing retreats, chakra alignment, meditation, and empowerment seminars for women. In reality, what Etheria uncovered was a machine of mind control, psychological abuse, sexual coercion, and women disappearing under voluntary cleansing sabbaticals. An empire masquerading as a sanctuary. Etheria had built the case from bone and blood, and now it was working. But that day in court, the third witness didn't show. The night before, she'd been found dead in her bathtub, wrists slit, no note. The second witness? Run off the road 2 weeks prior. The first? Gone. No trace. Not even dental records left behind. Still, Etheria stood. Voice like steel wrapped in silk. Let the court note, she said calmly, that every voice silenced only proves we are over the target. The crowd gasped. The judge's gavel banged. But she saw the flicker in the corner of her eye. A man in the gallery, face obscured, lips curled in a half-smile. Watching her. Waiting. That night, she came home to her penthouse and found everything untouched, except for the photo. Herself, robed in moonlight. The caption, "You were never meant to remember. But you're waking up too soon." That night, she dreams for the first time. A stone circle, a trial by fire, a woman bound in chains. And her own voice, ancient and unrecognizable. "If I forget, find me again. You always do." She wakes up screaming. By sunrise, the bank accounts were closed. The penthouse emptied. The law firm signed over. And Etheria Anthen disappeared. Present day at the RainbowHeart compound. Melisandre walks the grounds under moonlight. She touches the stone wall and has a vision, Etheria bleeding, a crowd chanting, her own hands glowing with white fire. She stumbles back, gasping. The vision fades. Inside the barn, Etheria can't sleep. She senses a shift like a string from the past being plucked. She doesn't know Melisandre is the cause. Not yet. Melisandre is alone in her room. She sits in the center of the pentagram. She lights the candles. She places the strand of Etheria's hair in a bowl of salt water and chants in a language she knows too well, and her soul remembers. She sees flashes. One of Etheria's face in another century. Etheria whispering, "You must find me again. Even if I don't remember. Even if I run." Melisandre gasps, clutching her chest. The flame goes out. Her fingers tremble. "I found you, but what did I lose?" In her house, Etheria stared into the embers. She hadn't thought about the case in years. Or the photo. Or the way she used to dream of hands she'd never held but missed all the same. She told herself she had left the city to save lives. But deep down, some part of her had run because of that photograph. Because the woman in it felt like truth. And the truth? It had teeth. She vowed never to let anything influence her, no witchcraft, even though she does not remember it, nothing of her previous life. But now it feels like something is hiding under her nose and she does not know what. The next morning, the wind carried a different kind of quiet. Melisandre walked past the gardens, nodding at women she didn't yet know, her mind still echoing with memories that didn't belong to this lifetime. Etheria watched her from across the field, arms folded tight, lips pressed into a line. They hadn't spoken since the gate, but the air between them hummed. Two women. One past, one buried, one remembering, and both hurtling toward the fire. Chapter 4. The Thread Between Worlds. The firewood cracked under the weight of twilight and the Highland wind sang a low lament. In the RainbowHeart compound, silence could mean peace or a storm rolling in under velvet cover. Melisandre knelt at the herb garden, her fingers dusted with lavender and damp earth. The older woman beside her, Mona, spoke of soil and the way it remembers what it grows. Melisandre listened, smiled politely, but her mind throbbed with ghosts. With flashes of Etheria's voice in another tongue. With the taste of salt water and ash still lingering from the night before. Across the garden, Etheria watched. Unmoving. A blade of sunlight catching on her cheekbone. She had not meant to stop, but her eyes followed Melisandre like the moon follows the tide, unwilling but tethered. Strange one, that girl, whispered Ailise beside her. Etheria didn't respond. Had a nightmare last night, Ailise added, almost sheepish. Fire, and a scream that split the sky. Etheria's hand twitched. Was it yours? I don't think so, Ailise replied. But it felt familiar. Etheria walked away without another word, her breath catching as she passed Melisandre. For a split second, their eyes met. Time folded. And for that blink, they were somewhere else. Cloaks, stars, circles drawn in chalk. Melisandre's hand bound in rope, Etheria reaching for her with bloodied palms. Then the vision shattered like glass, and Etheria stumbled. Melisandre rose instantly, catching her elbow. The touch was brief. The effect seismic. I'm fine, Etheria snapped, pulling back. But her voice betrayed her, too hoarse, too hollow. Melisandre didn't press. She simply said, sometimes, the earth remembers what we try to forget. That night, thunder threatened from the north. The wind carried the scent of snow, too early, too strange. Inside the barn, the women gathered for their nightly circle. But Etheria didn't join. She was in the archives beneath the main house, an old cellar where she kept the remnants of her past lives. Legal journals, old photos, letters she never mailed. And one small, velvet-covered book she never opened. Until now. She turned the pages slowly. A drawing. A circle of women. A sigil she'd never seen but somehow knew. The book trembled in her hands. Back in her room, Melisandre could barely breathe. Her wards pulsed like they were under siege. She lit the candles, whispered the chant, and pulled the old bronze mirror from her cloak of concealment. The surface shimmered. She saw it. Etheria, in the cellar, holding the Book of Thorns. Melisandre gasped. She's remembering. Lightning cracked outside, loud and sudden. A window in Etheria's house burst open. Pages flew into the air. Her hair whipped wildly around her face. And in the mirror, Melisandre saw not herself, but her other. The one who had burned for Etheria across lifetimes. She screamed. The candles blew out. The mirror cracked. A knock at her door. Melisandre opened it with a trembling hand, and Etheria stood there, soaked from the rain, her eyes wide, holding the velvet book. I need to know who the hell you are. Chapter 5. The fire remembers the flame. I need to know who the hell you are. The words cracked the air like a whip. Etheria stood in the doorway, rain dripping from her coat, from her hair, from her chin, like the storm had swallowed her and then spat her out just to deliver this moment. Melisandre said nothing. Not right away. Because there she was, not the lawyer, not the leader of RainbowHeart. No. In that moment, Etheria looked exactly like the girl Melisandre remembered, watching burn on a stake in 1623. Only now she had power again. Now she had questions. Melisandre stepped back silently, letting the door creak open. Etheria hesitated, but her feet had a will of their own. She stepped inside. The room was dark except for the flickering shadows of candles Melisandre hadn't lit. Etheria noticed. So, the wind lights candles now? She asked, dryly, eyes scanning. No, Melisandre said softly. You do. Etheria froze. The words fell like ash into her throat. Melisandre walked to the small table in the corner and ran her hand over what should have been an empty surface. In that moment, Etheria saw it. The grimoire. It shimmered into view like it had always been there, just hiding behind reality. You're one of them, Etheria breathed. A witch. Melisandre's gaze didn't waver. I am the last of a bloodline older than written word. And you are the one who betrayed me in another life. And still the one I burned for. Silence. It wasn't shock on Etheria's face. It was recognition. Why do I remember you? She whispered. Melisandre walked toward her, the book now in Etheria's hands, pulsing faintly. Because your soul never forgot me, Melisandre murmured. Even when your mind was wiped. Even when you were born into this world with no memory of the altar, the blood oath, or the fall of the last circle. Etheria staggered back, breath caught. What do you want from me? Melisandre tilted her head. Her voice was a whisper now, nearly lost in the howl of the storm. I want what was promised. What was stolen. I want you, Etheria. Whole. Remembering. Bound to me again. Etheria laughed, but it was bitter and scared and broken. I have 30 women under my care. A past I buried. A reality that doesn't need any of this mystical faded nonsense. Melisandre stepped closer. Her voice dropped into something deeper, more ancient. Then why did you come here, holding the book you swore to burn in every life? Etheria said nothing. Because she didn't know. Or maybe she did. She looked at the grimoire. Looked at Melisandre. And said, quietly, prove it. Outside, the wind screeched against the windows, a chorus of banshees. Inside, Melisandre raised her hand and spoke a word not heard since the old gods walked. The candles turned blue. The floor groaned. And Etheria's eyes widened as images filled the air, like smoke forming memory. The two of them, running through a forest chased by hunters with iron blades. Melisandre, dying in Etheria's arms on a battlefield soaked in both their blood. Etheria, in chains, whispering, I will find you again. And then, a child, no more than 6, standing before a coven. Her eyes the same as Etheria's. Enough. Etheria gasped. Turn it off, stop. The images vanished. The silence that followed was unbearable. You were the daughter of the moon, Melisandre said softly. And I was your keeper. Etheria fell to her knees. Her breath was a storm. I don't know who I am anymore. Melisandre knelt beside her, and for the first time, did not touch her. She just whispered. Then let me help you remember. Chapter 6. Salt, Smoke, and a Name Once Forsaken. The wind had finally stilled, but the house pulsed with something older than time. Etheria stood barefoot now, the velvet book still clutched in her hands, heart a frantic drumbeat in her ribs. Melisandre had not moved. She sat, cross-legged in the circle of candlelight, letting Etheria breathe through the terror. Through the ache. Through the unraveling. You're not ready for all of it, Melisandre finally said, voice threaded with centuries. But you're not a child to be protected anymore either. So I'll tell you just enough to set the fire. Etheria raised an eyebrow, voice scratchy from unshed screams. Oh, lucky me. Melisandre smiled, soft, too soft. You were never meant to live quietly. She began tracing lines in salt on the wooden floor. Etheria watched, the rhythm oddly familiar, like her fingers itched to join. This, Melisandre said, is the circle of retrieval. It's not a memory spell. It's not time travel. It's truth. Pure and unfiltered. It will show you one moment. Just one. But it will be yours. Unshaped by my words. Uncolored by your doubts. Etheria's gaze darkened. What's the catch? Melisandre didn't blink. Once you see it, the forgetting ends. Forever. No going back to ignorance. Etheria looked at the book. At the salt. At the woman who haunted her waking and dreaming alike. She stepped into the circle. Do it. Melisandre's smile didn't change, but her eyes, oh, they glowed. Not with fire, not with power, but with the pain of someone who's watched their love die over and over again. She placed her hands on Etheria's shoulders. Then chanting. The language was guttural, rhythmic, not of this world but deep in the bones of it. The flames around them burned white. The salt shimmered. The velvet book lifted, hovered between them. And then, Etheria was not in the room anymore. She stood barefoot in a stone temple, 1,000 candles flickering on high ledges. The air was thick with myrrh. She looked down, her hands weren't hers. Or rather, they were her hands then. Gold cuffs, blood at the knuckles, inked tattoos coiled down her forearms, runes of protection, power, binding. In front of her knelt Melisandre, naked from the waist up, hair shorn at the shoulders, a knife in her own hand. I offer myself to the cycle, Melisandre whispered. Again. And again. Until she remembers. Until she returns. Etheria heard her own voice reply. And I vow to follow. Through fire. Through death. Through silence. I will always find you. They each took the blade. They carved a sigil into each other's chest over the heart. The same sigil from the velvet book. Etheria gasped. And woke on the floor of Melisandre's room, skin slick with sweat, the book opened beside her, bleeding ink from the sigil onto the wood. I said you weren't ready, Melisandre said gently, stroking a strand of hair from her face. Etheria stared at her. No. I needed to see it. She reached for her blouse, unbuttoned it halfway. There, over her heart, the skin raised, raw and marked. The sigil burned fresh onto her body. Melisandre inhaled sharply. The bond, reformed without the ritual. That means that we're not in control anymore, Etheria said, her voice suddenly steel. They stared at each other. Old lovers. New strangers. Tied by a vow made in fire. Finally, Melisandre broke the silence. There's more coming, isn't there? Etheria nodded. I saw their faces. The ones who hunted us. They're not dead. They're waiting. Melisandre stood slowly. Then we prepare. Elsewhere. In a dark room, under a monastery disguised as ruins, a cloaked figure touched a flickering map etched in blood. A dot lit up. The RainbowHeart compound. A voice slithered through the shadows. She remembers. Another answered. Then burn them all. Before they complete the circle. Chapter 7. The Lion and the Flame. Etheria didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the sigil burn into her skin again. Felt Melisandre's blood on her fingers. Heard her own ancient voice swearing things she didn't remember but believed. By sunrise, she was already training. Hands wrapped, breath sharp, slamming her fists into the punching bag like it owed her something. Melisandre stood at the edge of the barn. Watching. She said nothing for a long time. Then, finally. Does it help? Etheria didn't look at her. Keeps me from screaming. Melisandre stepped inside, slow, careful, as though approaching a wounded predator. You're not crazy, she said. You're remembering. Not helping, Etheria snapped, striking again. Harder. I didn't ask to be part of some ancient romance novel with a side of blood sacrifice. No, Melisandre said, stepping closer. But you did vow to find me. And you did. Etheria turned then, eyes blazing. I built this life. This sanctuary. These women depend on me. I don't have room for reincarnated soul bonds and magic, and you showing up like a ghost with great hair and a tragic backstory. Melisandre actually laughed. Soft. Sad. Is that what I am to you? Just a disruption. Etheria faltered, but only for a moment. Then her walls snapped back up like iron gates. You don't get to guilt me into destiny. I'm not trying to guilt you, Melisandre said quietly. I'm trying to wake you up. You think this place is the only thing you built? You think the law, the compound, the women you've protected, that was all you. Etheria stepped back, her voice rising. Don't you dare turn this into some mystical plot point. I chose this life. I earned it. Melisandre's eyes flashed silver. Yes, you did. But so did she. She stepped forward, hand pressed flat over the sigil on her own chest. She died building a haven like this in another century. She was burned for it. You were burned for it. And now here you are again. Still building sanctuaries. Still saving women. Still pretending you're not something more than mortal. Etheria looked away, jaw clenched. I can't be what you want me to be. Melisandre's voice dropped. I don't want you to be anything but awake. They stood there, sweat and silence between them, until Etheria finally turned and grabbed her water bottle like it was a lifeline. What happens if I don't choose this? She asked, so softly it was barely a whisper. Melisandre exhaled. The old ones will find us. The hunters. They've been watching. If we're not bonded, if you reject the mark, it won't just kill you. It'll shatter your soul. You'll never reincarnate again. Etheria looked up sharply. So I'm a hostage to fate? No, Melisandre said, stepping forward, voice trembling now. You're my anchor. Without you, I lose the part of me that still believes in anything good. That broke something in Etheria. Because no one ever asked her to be wanted. They asked her to lead, to save, to decide. But Melisandre? She was asking her to stay. That night, Etheria didn't return to her house. She walked the Highlands under a full moon. She stood at the old stone circle where the women trained, where no one dared speak after sundown. And she whispered to no one. Who the hell am I? Behind her, the wind shifted. And from the dark, a voice answered. Mine. Chapter 8. The sky cracks red. The quiet came first. Too quiet. Not the peaceful hush Etheria was used to, no. This was the silence of the hunted. The morning chores had been interrupted by the sharp cry of the crows. They circled the eastern ridge like omens, too low, too many. Etheria stood on the barn's balcony, eyes scanning the mist curling along the tree line. Ailys jogged up beside her. We've got movement on the south perimeter. Not animals. Etheria's voice was cold steel. Get the women inside. Lockdown Protocol 3. No exceptions. Ailys didn't ask questions. She ran. Below, Melisandre emerged from her cottage in black, cloak snapping like a banner of war. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. She felt it. They had come. In the woods, 6 figures moved like breath across the earth. Pale robes, masked faces, not a whisper among them. Only the symbols tattooed across their palms gave them identity, the mark of the hollowed flame. Hunters of the reincarnate. One stopped at the tree lean, sniffed the wind. She's here, he said. The bond is not complete. We strike tonight. Etheria loaded her shotgun without flare. She'd only used it once. She had hoped she never would again. Melisandre stepped into the room like a storm being polite. Her hair was wild, lips pale, eyes fierce. You need to listen to me now. Etheria didn't turn. Already called for lockdown. This isn't a burglary, Melisandre snapped. This is ritualized annihilation. These bastards don't want you dead, they want your soul scattered to dust. Etheria slowly turned to her. Then they're about to be disappointed. You don't understand. Without the bond sealed, we are not sealing anything, Etheria roared. And for the first time, Melisandre flinched. Because that was the old voice. The voice from the trial. From the execution. From the last life they didn't survive. Melisandre closed her eyes. Whispered. They already marked the grounds. Etheria paused. What? Melisandre walked to the window, waved her hand over the pane. The glass shimmered, and there, in flickering ember-red runes, burned a warding circle. Only, it was inverted. They're binding us in, she said. When the sun sets, they'll light the outer ring. That energy will collapse the bond before it solidifies. And what happens to us? Melisandre turned slowly. Her voice cracked. You die. I die. And they end the line forever. The sun was already halfway down. The women were safely hidden in the storm bunker, candles flickering, singing softly to stay calm. Etheria stood at the gate, gun slung over one shoulder, heart kicking inside her ribs like a drum at war. Melisandre walked up beside her. You don't have to die tonight, she said. Etheria glanced sideways. Neither do you. Melisandre swallowed. There's another way. Etheria raised an eyebrow. The bond. We don't need a full ritual. Just an anchor. A single act of willing surrender. Etheria smirked bitterly. You're asking me to give you my soul like a trust fall? Melisandre's voice was low. Fierce. I'm asking you to let me protect what I already carry inside me. Etheria turned away. I need to think. Melisandre grabbed her arm. Bold. Dangerous. I am not your enemy, Etheria. But the night will be. Their eyes locked. And in that moment, the sun kissed the horizon, and the runes around the compound lit up like fire set to oil. From the trees, the 6 cloaked figures stepped forward. One removed his mask. You should have stayed forgotten. He lifted his hand. A bolt of energy cracked across the air, striking just short of the gate. Etheria didn't flinch. She raised her shotgun. Yeah, she said coolly. Well, I'm feeling very memorable tonight. Inside her chest, the sigil pulsed. And for the first time since the bond awoke, Etheria didn't push it down. Chapter 9. The Night Bleeds Truth. The moment the runes ignited, the air changed. It thickened. Charged. Like the atmosphere itself had teeth. Etheria didn't wait for another warning. She ran. Down the slope, across the wet grass, shotgun locked in her grip, heart hammering like war drums behind her ribs. Melisandre was right behind her, cloak billowing, hands already glowing with white-blue fire. Split left. Etheria shouted, boots sliding in the mud. Melisandre didn't hesitate. I'll draw them. You flank. They moved like they'd fought together before. Because they had. In another life. In another burning field. And now again. The first cloaked figure met Melisandre halfway. A blur of bone-white robes and a curved obsidian blade. Which he spat. Wrong incarnation, she snarled and unleashed hell. The fire exploded from her palm, a wave of blinding light slamming into his chest and sending him hurtling through the trees. Etheria didn't even blink. She had her own problems. 2 more hunters flanked her fast, silent, inhuman. She dove, rolled, and came up firing. The first shot shattered a shoulder. The second took a leg. She didn't hesitate. She didn't show mercy. You came to the wrong goddamn Highlands, she hissed, voice low and lethal. But the hunters didn't slow. They never slowed. On the ridge above the barn, Melisandre was cornered. 3 against 1 now. She dropped into a low stance, muttering the ancient incantation. The ground trembled beneath her feet. The runes on her arms blazed to life. But she was tired. So tired. They'd waited until she was vulnerable. Until the bond was half formed, and she was too full of Etheria's pain to summon her full strength. One blade sliced across her shoulder. She screamed. Magic flared unfocused. From across the field, Etheria heard it. She turned. Saw the blood. Saw the circle of attackers. And something in her snapped. The sigil on her chest erupted. Her knees buckled. Her breath caught. And for the first time in this life, Etheria let go. Let go of denial. Of fear. Of logic. She screamed, and the sound was not human. It was ancient. Ageless. A sound that split the air and cracked the moonlight. Lightning arced from her body and struck the ground around Melisandre. The hunters scattered. Melisandre gasped, eyes wide, the magic around her reigniting like the sun returning to the sky. Etheria walked through the smoke, through the fire, through the rain. Her voice was not her own. She is mine. You do not touch what is vowed to me. The remaining hunter, the leader, fell to his knees. You've awakened her, he hissed. You damned us all. Etheria raised the shotgun. No, she whispered. You did. And she pulled the trigger. After the last echo died, the mist rolled in again, slower this time, like it had seen enough. Etheria collapsed to her knees beside Melisandre, who was bleeding freely from the shoulder, her face pale. You're hurt, Etheria said, breath shaking. Melisandre smiled weakly. You remembered. You called me. I didn't mean to. You always say that, Melisandre whispered, fading. Etheria caught her before she hit the ground. She looked around burned earth, ash, blood, still bodies. And realized with horror and awe. She'd called down lightning without a spell. She looked at Melisandre, still breathing barely, and whispered, I'm sorry I fought it. I didn't want to lose myself. Melisandre, barely conscious, murmured, You're not losing yourself, Etheria. You're becoming who you always were. The battle is over. But the bond? That's only just beginning. Chapter 10. Beneath the smoke, the spark remains. The fire had been put out. The bodies removed. The women were safe. But the Highlands were never going to be the same again. The air was still thick with magic, not wild, not violent anymore, but ancient and waiting. In her room, Etheria sat cross-legged on the floor beside the fire, the velvet book open beside her, the pages still humming like a living thing. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the truth. She had called the storm. She had remembered power not as myth, not as metaphor, but as muscle, as instinct, as hers. And she had nearly lost Melisandre. A knock, barely a whisper, on the door. Etheria looked up. Come in, she said, already knowing. Melisandre stepped inside, shoulder bandaged, cloak dusted with ash, but her eyes were glowing. Softly, steadily. I was told to rest, she said. Didn't listen. Etheria didn't smile, but something behind her eyes softened. You never do. Melisandre walked slowly across the room and sank down beside her. The fire crackled between them, a quiet third companion. I should be angry, Etheria murmured. Melisandre tilted her head. Why? You let me fall into something I didn't choose. Melisandre's voice was barely a breath. You did choose. Just not with your mouth. Etheria turned, met her gaze. And what if I don't like who I'm becoming? Melisandre didn't blink. Then I'll remind you who you've always been. Silence stretched, not awkward, just heavy with meaning. The fire shifted. A log cracked. Then, without fanfare, Melisandre reached forward. Took Etheria's hand, slow and gentle. Her thumb brushed over the skin, over the faint scar where the sigil had burned through. You're still afraid, she said softly. I'm still furious, Etheria whispered back. Good. That means you're still you. Etheria's hand didn't pull away. Her voice dropped. Why do I still want to run? Melisandre's eyes darkened with ache, with truth, with eternity. Because I'm the only thing that's ever made you stay. Etheria let out a sound, half laugh, half sob. Do you have a line for everything? No, Melisandre said, inching closer. Only for you. A breath. A heartbeat. A pause. And then, so quietly it nearly didn't exist. I dreamed of you, Etheria said. Before you ever walked into that grocery store. I saw you burning. I saw myself standing still. Melisandre nodded. I dreamed of you begging me to find you again. Every night. Every century. They were closer now. Knees touching. Hands still entwined. The bond, no longer latent, thrummed under their skin, steady, quiet, sacred. Etheria leaned forward just enough that Melisandre could feel the shift in the air. You don't get to save me, she said. Melisandre's breath hitched. I know. And I don't want to be anyone's destiny. You're not. You're my choice. Etheria looked down. Then up. Then let her lips brush, just barely, against Melisandre's. The world didn't explode. It just settled. Like something ancient finally found where it belonged. They sat in silence after that. No grand declarations. No ritual. Just skin. Breath. Warmth. And a truth neither needed to run from anymore. The past was written in blood. But the future was finally unwritten. Chapter 11. The Quiet Before the Judgment. Morning in the Highlands came slow. Etheria stood at the edge of the compound, arms crossed, hair still wild from the night before. She hadn't slept, too many voices in her head, too much weight pressing down on her chest. Behind her, the community was waking. But not to normality. There were burn marks in the earth now. Sigils scorched into trees. Whispers thick in the air like fog. They had seen the fire. They had felt the shift. And the women of RainbowHeart, her women, were not blind. In the communal barn, a quiet tension pulsed through the air. The circle had gathered early. Eyes darted. Voices murmured. Some clutched hands. Others stared at the ash-covered floor like it would whisper answers. Melisandre leaned against the far wall, cloak wrapped tight, saying nothing. She didn't need to. She wasn't the one in charge here. Not yet. That honor, that burden, still belonged to Etheria. When the double barn doors opened and Etheria walked in, the murmurs stopped cold. She walked to the center, paused, looked each woman in the eye, and said, We were attacked last night. No embellishment. No softness. Just the truth. 6 strangers, cloaked, armed with magic and blades. They weren't thieves. They weren't lost. They were here for me. Gasps. One woman stood. What do you mean you? Who are they? Etheria inhaled. They call themselves the Hallowed Flame. They hunt, reincarnates. Bloodlines they believe are cursed. Lines they believe threaten their hold on power. Another woman. You're saying you're one of them? Etheria's throat tightened. She looked at Melisandre, who didn't move, didn't nod, didn't help. This had to come from her. I didn't believe it at first, she said quietly. Didn't want to. I've spent my life running from things I couldn't explain. Ignoring the dreams. The fire. The voices. But I can't anymore. Silence. And then, I am not just the woman who built this place. I am the woman who's died a dozen times for it. Across centuries. A low murmur rippled through the room. Some gasped. Others sat in stunned stillness. One of the older women, Rena, stood. I always knew, she said, voice quaking. The way you carried yourself. Like you'd been carrying the world before you ever stepped onto this land. Etheria's voice cracked. I protected you because it was right. Not because of magic. Not because of destiny. But because it's who I am. She looked at her hands. At the faint scar where the sigil still marked her. And last night, I remembered who I've always been. And who I will be. From the corner, Melisandre finally spoke. Some of you may fear what you saw last night. Fire and lightning and symbols you don't understand. But I swear this to you. She stepped forward, cloak falling away, revealing the deep cut across her shoulder. A reminder. A warning. She would have died to protect you. She nearly did. She didn't run. She fought. And she needs you now. Not as followers, but as witnesses. A moment passed. Then another. Then the cook, tiny, fierce, usually silent, stood. Walked to Etheria. And hugged her. Tight. Without a word. Then another woman. Then another. Until she stood in the middle of a quiet circle of hands, eyes, souls that saw her now. Not just as a leader, but as something else. As the truth. Later that day, Melisandre found her alone at the training circle, staring at the burnt earth. You did it, she said. Etheria shook her head. I don't know what I did. You gave them your truth. That's always the scariest part. She turned, facing her. And now? Melisandre stepped closer. Now we find out what else they were after. They didn't just want you dead. Etheria narrowed her eyes. You think they were looking for something? Melisandre nodded slowly. I think they were trying to stop something from being found. She reached into her cloak. Pulled out a fragment of scorched parchment taken from one of the bodies. And on it, a single phrase in the old tongue. She will awaken the gate. Chapter 12. The Gate Beneath the Skin. The parchment fragment lay between them on the old oak desk, its edges still warm with dark magic, the ink pulsing like a wound refusing to close. She will awaken the gate. Etheria stared at the words like they might blink first. Melisandre's fingers traced the sigil inked along the margin. It's old, she murmured. Older than either of us has ever been. The dialect, it's from the first convergence. Etheria's voice was flat. Translation. Melisandre looked up. It's prophecy. Tied to reincarnation. Tied to you. Etheria stood abruptly, pacing now. So what? I awaken a gate. Then what? Is this some end-of-the-world crap or just more mystical poetry wrapped in a riddle? Melisandre didn't smile. This isn't poetry. This is a warning. The gate isn't just a physical place, it's a spiritual vault. A lock between realms. One only opened by blood or betrayal. Etheria paused. Eyes narrowing. Where is it? Melisandre hesitated. Below the compound. The barn sat quiet above, a sleeping beast of wood and memory. But beneath it, beneath the planks worn smooth by generations of feet, there was a door. Etheria had always known it was there. Had always told herself it was just a storm shelter. Had never asked questions. Until now. They pried open the iron grate. It groaned like it hadn't been opened in decades. The air rushed up cold, stale, ancient. The kind of air that had teeth. Torchlight in hand, they descended. The staircase was spiral, stone slick with moss, carved not by tool but by ritual. Runes flickered along the walls, some Etheria recognized from her dreams. Others twisted into her spine like déjà vu. The air thickened as they descended. Then, a door. Massive. Seamless. Covered in sigils so old they looked like scars. Melisandre stepped forward, hand hovering inches from the surface. This was sealed the day your first incarnation died, she said. To keep the realms apart. To protect both sides from something. Etheria's voice was hoarse. And now it's waking up? Melisandre nodded. Because you are. Etheria stepped forward. The torchlight danced over her face, resolute, afraid, ready anyway. She placed her palm on the gate. It didn't budge. Until the sigil on her chest flared, searing through cloth and flesh alike, and the door responded a low, groaning moan like the earth remembering pain. A crack split down the center. Melisandre grabbed her wrist. "We don't open it yet. We're not ready." Etheria turned, eyes wide, voice trembling. "Then why does it know me?" Melisandre stared at her, voice quiet. "Because you built it." They returned to the surface in silence, the gate still humming beneath their feet like a dragon in its sleep. Outside, the women were laughing. Children chased chickens. Life moved as though the world hadn't tilted. But Etheria knew now. Something is buried beneath RainbowHeart. And it knows her name. That night, she stood alone in her home, staring into the fire again. When Melisandre walked in, she didn't speak. Just moved to her side. And Etheria leaned in. Not to kiss. Not to confess. But to ask the one question she hadn't let herself ask until now. What happens if we open it? Melisandre's answer came like thunder in a whisper. Then everything we forgot remembers us. Chapter 13. The Sin of the First Flame. They spent the next 2 days in the archives, if you could call them that. Really, it was just a pile of boxes hidden behind false walls, filled with scraps of parchment, half-burnt tomes, and memories no one dared to catalog. Etheria didn't eat. Didn't sleep. Barely spoke. She was chasing something. And Melisandre? She watched. She waited. Because pushing Etheria now was like trying to hold back a flood with bare hands. "I remember. Pieces," Etheria murmured on the third night. "Visions. Fractures. Fire. Screams." Melisandre looked up from the old binding circle diagram. "That's how it always starts. The closer we get to the gate, the more your soul remembers." "I see you," Etheria whispered, gaze far away. "You were crying. Telling me not to do it. I didn't listen." Melisandre closed the book. "No, you didn't." They found it in the last box, bound in sinew, sealed with blood ink. An account from a priestess of the old circle. A woman named Marin. The script was jagged. Written during a siege. She burned the sky. Etheria of the flame. She called down the stars to destroy the hollowed ones. But the magic was too strong. It fractured her. It would have unmade the realms. So she built the gate. Poured her power into stone and blood. It cost her life. Cost her soul. She swore she'd never open it again. The gate was not a lock. It was a punishment. And a promise. Etheria stared at the page, her hands trembling. "I made the gate," she whispered. "I sealed it to stop myself." Melisandre nodded. Her voice was barely a breath. "You were too powerful. Too dangerous. You nearly broke reality. And now I'm waking up again," Etheria said. "And the gate is humming because you're no longer fractured," Melisandre finished. "Because your soul is whole." Etheria stood abruptly, pacing, winded. Her voice cracked. "So, if I open it, I become her. The version of me that almost tore everything apart." Melisandre didn't answer right away. "Then, maybe, or maybe, you become the version of you that survives it. That doesn't have to choose between power and love. That finally learns to carry both." Etheria sank into the nearest chair, hands buried in her hair. "I don't want to be a god. I just want to protect what I've built." Melisandre walked over. Sat across from her. "Etheria, you didn't build RainbowHeart in spite of your magic. You built it because of the parts of you that remembered what it felt like to burn everything down." She reached across the table slowly and took Etheria's hand. "You built this haven as an apology. What if you open the gate now, to forgive yourself?" The fire crackled nearby. Etheria stared into it, lost. "Would you stand by me," she asked, "if I become her again?" Melisandre didn't blink. "I've loved you in every life. Even the ones where you didn't love me back. Even the ones where you killed me." She squeezed her hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Outside, the wind picked up. Beneath the compound, the gate pulsed once quiet. Like it heard her heart whisper. "I don't want to open it. But I think I must." Chapter 14. the mirror in the gate. She came alone. Melisandre had offered to come with her, hand already half extended. But Etheria had stopped her with one quiet word. No. Some journeys are meant to be solitary. The gate groaned as she approached, recognizing her now. It didn't resist. It opened. Stone split with a hiss-like breath held for centuries, finally being exhaled. Beyond it, darkness. Not the absence of light, but something older. The kind of dark that remembers you. She stepped into the chamber, and it sealed behind her. There were no flames, no lights, no sigils to read. Just a circle of black glass in the center of the floor. Still. Reflective. Waiting. Etheria stepped to its edge. And it awoke. The mirror rippled like water, and a figure rose from it. Her. But not her. Etheria, pre-fracture. Eyes ablaze. Hair like wildfire. Armor forged from runes and wrath. She looked divine. Terrible. Beautiful. Untouchable. Hello, little shadow, the reflection purred. Etheria didn't flinch. Is this the part where you tell me I'm not worthy? The mirror version laughed, a low, rich sound like thunder seducing the sea. No. This is the part where I remind you what you gave up. The mirror shifted. Etheria saw flashes. Herself commanding armies with a flick of her wrist. Melisandre kneeling at her side, bloodied but smiling. The stars bending to her name. And then, the collapse. A world torn open. Screaming. Ash where forests used to be. A girl, a child, burning in a circle of fire, reaching for her. Etheria gasped. Clenched her fists. You were power without mercy, she whispered. You didn't build anything. You conquered. I protected what was mine, her mirror self hissed. The world is cruel. I made it kneel. At what cost? At every cost, the reflection snarled. But we never broke. We never bled. We were gods. Etheria stepped forward. Her voice like stone now. No. We were afraid. So, we burned the world first so no one could burn us. Silence. Then, you came back weak, the mirror spat. You hide behind skirts and songbirds. You beg for love. You forgot who you are. No, Etheria said, stepping into the circle. Into the mirror. I chose to remember something stronger than fire. She placed her palm against her reflections. The mirror self snarled. Etheria's sigil flared beneath her skin. I am not your shadow. And you're not my godhood. You're my lesson. And then, softly, I forgive you. The reflection cracked. Hairline fractures split across the mirror like veins of lightning. The rage melted. And the reflection, once divine, terrible, glowing, knelt. I was never meant to lead, it said. But you can. Then it shattered. And the light poured in. Etheria stood alone, heart hammering in her chest, arms shaking. But she didn't fall. Because this time, she wasn't broken by her past. She was built by it. When she stepped out of the gate chamber, Melisandre was waiting. Etheria said nothing, just walked forward. And Melisandre, eyes wide, voice trembling, reached for her. Who did you face? Myself, Etheria whispered. The part of me that forgot what power was for. And what is it for? Melisandre asked, voice soft. Etheria looked toward the mountains, the compound, the women she loved like family. And then at Melisandre. To protect what's sacred. The gate had not closed. But it no longer hummed with warning. Now it waited. For her command. Chapter 15. After the flame, the bloom. It was quiet in Etheria's house. The fire had burned low, casting amber shadows across the walls. The world outside was still turning, still watching, but inside these four walls, it waited. Melisandre stood by the window, hands loosely clasped behind her back, gaze distant. She didn't turn when Etheria entered. I saw the light, she said softly. I felt the gate shift. Did it hurt? Etheria closed the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaustion settling in her bones, but not heaviness. No, she said. It didn't hurt. It healed. Melisandre turned then. And something passed between them. Not hunger. Not tension. Recognition. Not of what they had been. But what they still could be. Etheria walked forward, slow, deliberate. Melisandre didn't move. Not until Etheria reached up and traced the edge of her jaw with calloused fingers. I was always running, Etheria murmured. From the fire. From you. From myself. Melisandre's breath caught. And now? Etheria leaned in. Now I just want to stop. Melisandre's hands found her waist, tentative. Like touching a memory too fragile. And Etheria? She leaned in first. Their lips met, not with fireworks, but with weight. Like gravity had finally found what it was meant to pull together. The kiss was slow. A tether, not a spark. Melisandre's mouth opened under hers, and Etheria deepened it, not out of lust, but relief. Like coming home. Later, wrapped in furs and one another, limbs tangled, breath warm on skin. Melisandre whispered into her neck. You've changed. I've chosen, Etheria replied. Melisandre smiled against her collarbone. And what have you chosen? Etheria pulled her closer. You. This. Every day we're given. Melisandre propped herself up, her hair a dark curtain around them both. And when the gate calls again? We answer it, Etheria said. Together. Not because we must, but because we can. The moon watched through the window. The gate below was silent. And two souls, scorched across lifetimes, finally rested. Not warriors. Not witches. Just women. In love. Epilogue, the bloom after the burn. 6 years later, RainbowHeart Sanctuary. The Scottish Highlands still rolled with mist and wind, but the compound had grown. Where once stood 30 small homes, there were now 50, each carved from stone and wood, tucked into the land like they'd always been meant to be there. Greenhouses lined the northern edge. A new school sat near the eastern ridge, where children learned both mathematics and magic. And in the center of it all, where the fire pit once stood alone, there was now a temple, built of reclaimed stone and warmed with golden light. No pews. No doctrine. Just a place to breathe. To remember. To gather. To begin again. Inside their shared home, an expanded version of Etheria's old cottage, Melisandre knelt in the garden, fingers stained with lavender and sage. Her raven hair was streaked with a silver that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with grace. She hummed softly, placing a small rune stone beneath a sprouting rosebush. From the doorway, Etheria watched her. Still auburn-haired. Still strong as stone. But her edges had softened, her voice warmer, her laughter easier. She held a steaming mug of coffee and leaned against the frame. You're enchanting the roses again, she teased. Melisandre looked over her shoulder with a smile that could melt time. I like when they bloom twice in one season. Etheria stepped forward, setting the mug beside her. Is that what I am to you? She murmured. Your late bloom. Melisandre looked up. Her hands found Etheria's knees, trailing upward until she stood, face to face. No, she whispered. You were always in bloom. You just didn't know it. The compound had changed. Not just in size, but in purpose. Now, RainbowHeart wasn't just a refuge. It was a training ground. A sanctuary. A legacy. They took in reincarnates, witches, humans with scars too deep for the world outside to name. They taught defense. They taught healing. They taught truth. That night, as the wind howled and fire crackled, Etheria and Melisandre lay tangled in each other, wrapped in furs, fingers interlaced. Do you miss the gate? Melisandre asked. Etheria shook her head, eyes on the ceiling. No. It still hums sometimes. But I've learned to let it hum. I don't need to open anything anymore. I'm already open. Melisandre smiled against her shoulder. And what do you see ahead? Etheria turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Peace. Maybe a child. Maybe more. Melisandre blinked. You? Raising a child? I was a goddess of fire once, Etheria said, smirking. How much harder can motherhood be? They both laughed deep, real, raw. Their kiss was a seal of their life ahead, together, always together. And somewhere beneath them, the gate pulsed. Not with threat, but with approval. Etheria had changed the world once by accident. Now, she changed it every single day on purpose. And for the first time across lifetimes, She was truly, gloriously happy.